November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas. The skies were clear, the crowds were cheerful. Thousands of Americans lined the streets, hoping to glimpse the young president who seemed to embody a new era. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was only 46 years old. Handsome, charismatic, confident. To millions, he represented hope during one of the most dangerous periods in modern history. Yet on that Friday afternoon, politics seemed far away. Children waved American flags, photographers prepared their cameras. Everything appeared normal. Then, at approximately 12:30 in the afternoon, gunshots echoed across Dealey Plaza. Within seconds, everything changed. By the end of the day, the President of the United States was dead. But while the tragedy itself lasted only moments, the questions that followed would last decades. Who was Lee Harvey Oswald? Did he truly act alone? And how did a crime witnessed by thousands become one of the most debated events in modern history?
When John F. Kennedy entered the White House in January 1961, the United States was already locked in a struggle that defined an entire generation: the Cold War. For years, tensions between America and the Soviet Union had shaped global politics. Every major decision carried the possibility of international consequences. Every crisis risked escalation, and every leader understood that a single mistake could trigger nuclear war. Kennedy inherited this dangerous world at just 43 years old, becoming one of the youngest presidents in American history. Many doubted whether he possessed the experience necessary to navigate such turbulent times. The world stood divided between East and West. Nuclear weapons threatened the future, and on the shoulders of one young man rested decisions that could shape the survival of millions.
His presidency faced an early test in April 1961. The Bay of Pigs invasion. A covert operation intended to overthrow Fidel Castro's government in Cuba ended in complete disaster. The failed invasion embarrassed the United States and damaged Kennedy's reputation during the earliest months of his administration. For a young leader still trying to prove himself, it was a humiliating beginning. Critics questioned his judgment. Allies questioned his strength. Yet Kennedy remained determined to recover. He studied what had gone wrong. He reconsidered who he could trust. And he prepared himself for the challenges still to come. The following year, he would face an even greater test, one that brought the entire world to the very edge of catastrophe. In October 1962, American intelligence discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba, just off the coast of Florida. The world suddenly found itself closer to nuclear war than ever before. For 13 days, the Cuban Missile Crisis dominated global headlines. Military leaders prepared for conflict. Citizens feared the worst. Some families even began planning for a potential nuclear attack. Behind closed doors, Kennedy resisted enormous pressure to strike first. Ultimately, he and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev negotiated a peaceful resolution. The crisis ended without war. For many Americans, Kennedy emerged stronger than before. His approval ratings rose. His confidence grew. His international reputation improved. The young president who had stumbled at the Bay of Pigs had now stared down annihilation, and won. But success often creates opposition. Behind the scenes, Kennedy's administration was navigating increasingly complex relationships with powerful institutions. His handling of Cuba generated disagreements within parts of the intelligence community. His foreign policy frustrated some military leaders. His efforts on civil rights angered segregationists across the American South. His administration also challenged established political interests in Washington. To be clear, historians continue to debate the significance of these conflicts. Disagreement within government is not unusual, nor does political opposition imply criminal intent. Yet by late 1963, Kennedy was governing a deeply divided nation. His supporters called his administration Camelot, an image of youthful leadership and national ambition. But beneath that optimistic image, powerful disagreements continued to shape American politics. Few people realized just how little time remained. Long before he became one of the most infamous names in American history, Lee Harvey Oswald lived a life marked by instability. Born on October 18, 1939, in New Orleans, Louisiana, Oswald never knew his father, who died before he was born. His childhood was difficult. Frequent moves. Financial struggles. Long periods of isolation. He drifted between cities and schools, never staying anywhere long enough to belong. Teachers and relatives often described him as intelligent, but distant. A boy who seemed to live somewhere inside his own head. As he grew older, he developed an increasing interest in politics and ideology, searching, perhaps, for the sense of purpose and belonging that his early life had never given him. In 1956, at the age of 17, Oswald joined the United States Marine Corps. The decision provided structure and opportunity, a sense of order he had rarely known. It also exposed him to firearms training. During his military service, Oswald qualified as a marksman. His shooting performance varied over time, but he gained real, hands-on experience handling rifles and military equipment. Even then, some fellow Marines remembered him as different from those around him. He frequently discussed politics. He expressed open interest in Marxist ideas. He even began teaching himself Russian. And he openly criticized aspects of American society, in a way that unsettled the men who served beside him. He was a United States Marine who seemed increasingly drawn to the nation's greatest rival. In 1959, Oswald made a decision that shocked nearly everyone who knew him. He traveled to the Soviet Union. At the very height of the Cold War, he walked into the American embassy in Moscow and announced his intention to renounce his American citizenship and live under communist rule. It was an extraordinary act of defiance. Soviet authorities initially viewed him with deep suspicion, unsure whether he was a genuine believer or an American spy. Eventually, they allowed him to remain. Oswald settled in the city of Minsk and worked in a factory. For a time, he was given an apartment and a modest life. Yet the future he had imagined never fully materialized. According to later accounts, he became increasingly bored and disappointed with everyday life in the Soviet Union. By 1962, Oswald sought permission to return to the United States. Surprisingly, and to the puzzlement of many later researchers, he was allowed to do so. He came back with his young wife, Marina, whom he had met and married while living in the Soviet Union. Back in America, Oswald struggled to establish any kind of stability. He moved frequently. He changed jobs repeatedly. And he remained deeply, restlessly interested in political causes. In 1963, he became involved with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, an organization that supported improved relations with Fidel Castro's government. He handed out leaflets on street corners. His activities attracted some attention, but he remained largely unknown to the wider public. Few imagined that history would soon place this obscure, troubled man at the very center of an international controversy. Friday, November 22, 1963. President Kennedy's visit to Texas had both political and symbolic objectives. The state was important for the upcoming 1964 election, and party leaders hoped the trip would strengthen Democratic unity and smooth over rivalries among competing factions. The president arrived in Dallas shortly before noon, and the atmosphere appeared overwhelmingly positive. Shortly after 11:50, Air Force One landed at Love Field. Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy greeted cheering supporters before entering the open presidential limousine. The route had been published in advance. Citizens knew exactly where to stand. Photographers knew where to position themselves. Television crews prepared their equipment. Secret Service agents scanned the rooftops. Everything, on the surface, appeared completely normal. The motorcade began moving slowly through the streets of Dallas. Witnesses later described an almost festive atmosphere. People waved. Children cheered. Spectators leaned forward, hoping for a better view of the famous young couple. The presidential limousine moved deliberately slowly, allowing the public to see the president and the first lady up close. Jacqueline Kennedy held a bouquet of red roses. The sun was bright. The mood was warm. As noon approached, the motorcade turned and entered Dealey Plaza, an open square in the heart of the city. This ordinary patch of pavement would soon become one of the most studied locations in all of modern history. At approximately 12:30, the limousine passed beneath the windows of the Texas School Book Depository. Moments later, witnesses reported hearing a loud, sharp noise. Then another. And another. Many initially believed the sounds were firecrackers, or perhaps a car backfiring. Others immediately recognized them for what they were. Gunshots. Confusion swept through the crowd. Some people froze in place. Others threw themselves to the ground. Many looked in completely different directions, unable to tell where the shots had come from. Some ran toward the grassy slope beside the road. Secret Service agents reacted instantly, scrambling toward the president's car. The presidential limousine suddenly accelerated, racing toward Parkland Memorial Hospital. Inside the vehicle, chaos had erupted. The President of the United States had suffered catastrophic injuries, in full view of his wife and a horrified crowd. Across Dallas, information remained unclear and contradictory. Radio broadcasts delivered fragmented, frightening reports. Rumors spread faster than facts. For a brief, agonizing period, no one fully understood what had happened. Then, at 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, President John F. Kennedy was officially pronounced dead at Parkland Memorial Hospital. He was 46 years old. The youngest elected president in American history had been killed in broad daylight, on a sunny street, surrounded by thousands of his own citizens. Shock swept across the entire nation. Television networks interrupted their regular programming. Businesses closed their doors. Churches filled with stunned mourners. Schoolchildren were sent home. Families gathered around radios and televisions, searching desperately for answers that no one yet had. Even as the nation began to mourn, investigators were already racing to identify a suspect. Law enforcement across Dallas launched one of the most urgent manhunts in American history. The immediate priorities were clear. Identify the shooter. Determine whether others were involved. And prevent any further violence. Witnesses inside and around the Texas School Book Depository quickly became central to the investigation. Employees were questioned. The towering building was searched, floor by floor. Within hours, attention focused sharply on the 6th floor. There, authorities discovered spent cartridge cases near a window, and a rifle, hidden among the boxes, later identified as an Italian-made Mannlicher Carcano. The discovery appeared deeply significant. But investigators still needed to connect the weapon to a specific suspect. As police continued their search, events elsewhere in the city added a new and urgent layer to the unfolding drama. At approximately 12:45, Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit was shot and killed in the quiet Oak Cliff neighborhood. Witnesses reported seeing a man flee the scene on foot. The description they gave soon matched an individual already drawing police attention. The search intensified. Less than an hour later, officers received reports of a suspicious man slipping into the Texas Theater without paying. Police quickly surrounded the building. Inside, in the darkened cinema, they confronted Lee Harvey Oswald. A struggle followed. According to police reports, Oswald resisted arrest, even attempting to draw a weapon, before he was finally subdued and taken into custody. The nation now had a suspect. But far more questions remained unanswered. Why had Oswald allegedly left the book depository so soon after the assassination? What role, if any, had he played in Officer Tippett's death? And above all, what could possibly have motivated him? As journalists crowded outside police headquarters, investigators worked around the clock. Meanwhile, Oswald himself became the center of intense, chaotic media attention. When questioned by reporters, he firmly denied responsibility. One of his most famous statements came during a brief, jostled encounter with the press. "I'm just a patsy." The remark would become one of the most quoted phrases in the entire case. Supporters of the official investigation viewed it as a desperate man's attempt to avoid responsibility. Critics later argued it raised questions that were never properly answered. Sunday, November 24, 1963. Just 2 days after the assassination, much of America remained glued to its television sets. The nation was still in shock. Yet authorities believed they were making real progress. Plans were underway to transfer Oswald from police headquarters to the county jail, a routine move, broadcast live to a watching country. Television cameras crowded into the basement parking garage. Reporters waited. Officers positioned themselves around the suspect. Then, without any warning, everything changed. As Oswald emerged, surrounded by police, a man suddenly stepped forward from the crowd. He was later identified as Jack Ruby, a Dallas nightclub owner with connections to local law enforcement. Before anyone could react, Ruby fired a single shot into Oswald's abdomen. The suspect accused of killing the president had himself been shot, live, on national television. Chaos erupted in the garage. Officers tackled Ruby. Medical personnel rushed to save Oswald, but the damage was severe. He was transported to Parkland Memorial Hospital, the very same hospital where President Kennedy had been treated only 2 days earlier. Shortly afterward, Lee Harvey Oswald was pronounced dead. He was 24 years old. The implications were immediate and profound. The only person ever charged with assassinating the president was now dead. Any future trial was impossible. Cross-examinations would never occur. Evidence would never be challenged in open court. Questions that might have been answered through legal proceedings would remain unresolved, perhaps forever. Authorities arrested Jack Ruby, who claimed he had acted out of grief and outrage over Kennedy's death. Some concluded he acted on impulse. Others suspected far deeper connections. No definitive consensus ever emerged. Without a trial, the government faced an enormous challenge. The American public demanded answers. The world demanded answers. And confidence in the official account depended entirely on providing them. So the federal government launched an investigation unlike any before it. On November 29, 1963, just 1 week after the assassination, President Lyndon B. Johnson established a special investigative body. It became known as the Warren Commission, chaired by Chief Justice Earl Warren and including prominent figures from both major parties. Its objective was ambitious. Determine exactly what happened in Dallas. Over the following months, investigators gathered an enormous volume of information. Thousands of interviews were conducted. Hundreds of witnesses were questioned. Photographs, films, and medical records were reviewed in painstaking detail. The scale of the investigation was absolutely unprecedented. In September 1964, the commission released its final report. Its central conclusion was clear and unambiguous. Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone. According to the commission, Oswald fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. The report concluded that no credible evidence supported the existence of a broader conspiracy, either foreign or domestic. For many Americans, exhausted by months of grief and speculation, the findings finally provided a sense of closure. The case, it seemed, was solved. The mystery, it seemed, was over. But not everyone was convinced. Almost immediately, a small but determined group of researchers, journalists, and ordinary citizens began to question whether the official story could really explain everything that had happened in Dealey Plaza. One of the most debated aspects of the entire report involved what became known as the single bullet theory. According to the Commission's reconstruction, a single bullet passed through President Kennedy's neck before striking Texas Governor John Connally, who was seated directly in front of him, causing multiple wounds. Supporters argued the theory was fully consistent with the available evidence, and necessary to explain the precise sequence of injuries within the time frame. Critics strongly disagreed. Some questioned whether one bullet could really have caused so many separate wounds and remained relatively intact. Others argued that witness testimony and the timing of the shots created inconsistencies that were never fully resolved. The debate quickly expanded far beyond forensic details, and questions soon emerged about the investigative process itself. In the years that followed, the official conclusion remained unchanged. Yet public certainty did not follow official certainty. Instead, something unusual happened. The more time passed, the more the case seemed to expand, rather than close. A major turning point came in the late 1960s and 70s. As new political scandals erupted, public trust in government institutions began to crumble. The Vietnam War raised painful questions about transparency and honesty. The Watergate scandal reinforced deep fears of hidden political activity. In that environment, the Kennedy assassination became more than a historical case. It became a symbol. The gradual release of classified materials generated renewed debate. Researchers pointed to inconsistencies in witness statements. Some reported hearing shots from different directions. And yet, despite decades of analysis, no alternative theory ever achieved universal acceptance. Instead, the result was fragmentation, competing narratives, and an enduring lack of consensus. John F. Kennedy's presidency lasted less than 3 years. Yet its cultural impact far exceeded its brief duration. Before Dallas, Kennedy represented a specific vision of America. Youthful leadership, technological optimism, Cold War confidence, and a deep belief in progress. After Dallas, that image changed forever. His administration helped the world avoid nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis. His positions on civil rights contributed to legislation that would reshape American society. His ambitious space program set the foundation for the Apollo missions and the moon landing. But his presidency is also inseparable from its abrupt and violent ending. The phrase "what if" became central to how he is remembered. What if he had completed his second term? What direction would the nation have taken? These questions have no definitive answers. Yet they remain forever central to his legacy. The assassination of John F. Kennedy remains one of the most studied events in all of modern history. The official conclusion states that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, and that position remains the foundation of the government's records. But public interpretation continues to vary, even today. Not because the evidence is absent, but because the evidence is genuinely complex. And history, when examined closely, rarely produces simple narratives. What happened in Dallas on November 22, 1963, lasted only seconds. But its impact has lasted for generations. It reshaped American political culture. It permanently altered public trust in institutions. And it created a historical mystery that continues to resist final closure, more than 60 years later. Ultimately, the Kennedy assassination is not only about what was known. It is also about what remains debated. And about why some events in history simply refuse to be laid to rest.